Okay, so thank you much all for attending and welcome to those in attendance at the remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You are also reminded to note that we may have members of the public or press observing today's proceedings. Can I ask all those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphone and camera switched off throughout? Can members of the local review body leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of these reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 6 requests for a review of a decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents, as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I now ask Mrs. McBain, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews and to take a roll call of all members present.
Thank you, Convener. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. The first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. The regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. The focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. The circumstances in which additional matters can be taken into account are set out in the legislation and will be addressed by the LRB advisors where relevant. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. I'll just quickly note that everybody's here. So, Councillor McCrae?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Alphonse?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
Present.
Councillor Bolton?
Present.
And Councillor Lawrence?
Present.
Thank you. We've got the same 5 members for all the cases, so I'll just hand back now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So, turning to consideration of the first review in respect of a decision to refuse the application for detailed planning permission for the erection of dwelling house with garage near boundary wall and associated landscaping at Spademill Studio, Spademill Lane, Aberdeen, planning reference 230759. We'll now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of why the reasons of the application was refused. I point out today that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in the early consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any view of the merits of proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms. Green, over to you.
Thank you, and morning members. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can, thank you.
Yes. Right, I've just shared my presentation. So this is the application for erection of dwelling at Spademill Lane, and the request for review against the application refused under delegated powers was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant indicated on the notice of review that there are no new matters raised in the review submissions, and in terms of the procedure, the applicant expressed the view that it may proceed without a site visit. So I'll carry on and provide some background information before handing back for members to decide how to proceed. So first of all, the application site. Spademill Lane runs along the rear of properties that front onto Queen's Road, and the studio fronts onto the lane at the back there. So the site includes this area at the rear of 78 Queen's Road. And that's an image from Google showing the existing building on the site there, with the building fronting onto Queen's Road just there outside the site. And this is a 3D image showing the existing building on the site. And this plan shows the boundary of the Albine Place and Rubislaw Conservation Area, which the site falls into, and also the Category C listed building adjacent, and other listed buildings are shown on there as well. So this plan is the proposed site plan, and you can see the existing building in these red dashed lines here. And the proposal is for a 2-storey section of the dwelling house with a single storey running back into the site there. And then this is a courtyard garden. That's Spade Mill Lane at the top there. And this plan shows the existing trees and the proposals for replacements within the site. So these trees in the dark red are obviously outside the site. These ones are within the site and would be replaced with trees along the west boundary, which are shown here. So a replacement holly, broadleaf hawthorn would replace Leylandii. Again, a holly, and replacement for a yew tree would be a white beam, and then a further broadleaf rowan tree at the bottom there. I've just enlarged the text there so it doesn't quite line up, but those are the replacement trees. So moving on to the elevations. This is the north elevation that would face onto the lane. So you can see this timber cladding at the ground floor and at the upper floor, and natural slate to the roof. And then granite walls with line pointing to the sides. And there'll be parking for 2 cars. The west elevation, again timber cladding, stonework below, and the existing boundary walls would remain. And this is just showing proposed tree planting. And then behind that is the single storey element of the building there. And this is obviously Spade Mill Lane. So south elevation facing back towards 78 Queen's Road. See that there's an enclosed, an open terrace with a roof over, with glass balustrade to that, timber cladding, slate roof, and render to the courtyard elevations. This is obviously the long single-storey element of the building. And then this is the south elevation showing the boundary wall, which would be 1.8 metres in height on the Spade Mill Lane side. And then the east elevation. And you can see the single storey element of the building along there. And then this is a section through the building, taken at the point where the parking is underneath. You can see the wall there, 1.8 metres on this side. And that's the elevation that would face into the courtyard and the terrace there. Moving on to the floor plans, the ground floor plan. Parking for 2 cars there. and then the garden area. And the first floor plan. So there would be a cedar roof on top of the single-storey element. And the roof plan. So those are drawings of the existing building, which is a two-storey building with a sort of mansard roof. Floor plans of the existing building, which is noted in the report as being 101 square metres. So turning to the reasons for refusal, which are stated in full in the agenda. Firstly, overdevelopment in terms of policy H1 residential areas, and also the Aberdeen planning guidance, two planning guidances, development along rear lanes, and also the subdivision and redevelopment of residential curtilages. So the scale, form and design are not small scale, and there would therefore be an impact on the street scene on Spade Mill Lane. They are not informed by the sites and the area's historic context, including the envelope of the original building, and are therefore contrary to policies H1 on residential areas, D1 on quality placemaking in the local development plan, and policy 14 on design in NPF 4, and also the Aberdeen planning guidance that was noted before. That they would have an overbearing impact on the north elevation of 78 Queen's Road. That's at a lower level than the site. There would be a lack of external space, contrary to policy D2 and NE2. The excessive scale and form would be have a detrimental impact on the character of the conservation area, which wouldn't be preserved, and also on the setting of the category C listed 78 Queen's Road. And it would therefore be contrary to Historic Environment Policy for Scotland, Policy 7 on historic assets and place, Policy D6 in the Local Development Plan on historic environment, and also the Managing Change Guidance on settings. So the applicant's case could be summarised as follows, that the proposal complies with NPF 4 policies on brownfield sites and urban development and the location of new homes in accessible locations, and that's policy 16. But also that it complies with policy H1 in the local development plan, that it's not overdevelopment. There would not be an adverse impact on amenity or on the character of the surrounding area, and there would be no loss of open space. Also that it complies with most of the Aberdeen planning guidance, which requires that the design responds to the historic context, and it complies with there's quite a long checklist in the planning guidance on rear lane development, and also it makes the point that the Aberdeen planning guidance is guidance, not a strict rule. They state that the house and garden are suited to the scale of the site, with the design being a very high standard, and that the proposed house would have a high level of amenity on the lane and also in the enclosed court. That there would be no undue impact on number 78 Queen's Road, which is being converted to 3 flats, and that the application site and 78 Queen's Road have been 2 separate plots for many years. It's further stated there will be a positive impact on the conservation area. It would be enhanced, whereas the policy only requires preservation. Also, that there were no objections from the public or consultees and that the Community Council has supported the application. Just to note on the Community Council support that the case officer did receive that, but very late in the process, and therefore didn't consider it as a valid representation, and it therefore shouldn't be taken into account. So just to mention other applications that are relevant, there's a conservation area consent for demolition of the existing building, and that was refused on the 24th of September. Also, as was mentioned, adjacent to the site at 78 Queen's Road, there's detailed planning permission and listed building consent for the conversion of the building to form 3 residential flats, and those were approved in December and January. And in terms of consultations, as I mentioned, in the report of handling, the case officer said there was no response from the Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council because it was received too late to be taken into account. The Roads Development Management team had no objection. The Waste team also had no objection. And in terms of environmental health, there was no objection, but they asked for an advisory to be put on about a wood burner, and that's just that it should be used and maintained in line with instructions and no wet wood burnt. So I'll hand back now to you, convener, for members to decide how to proceed.
Thank you very much. So, somebody's phone. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, a reminder, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, we can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. I'll quickly go around the room and see how we're all feeling. So, Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. I believe there's enough information for us to proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bolton.
I'm happy with the information provided and the fact we've got access to Google Maps if we need to look at things.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
I'm happy with the information that I've received. I feel there's enough information there without a site visit.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, happy to continue.
And I'm happy to continue as well. Perfect. Therefore, as all members have sufficient information to take a decision, they do not feel any further procedures are required, we'll pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us to the next part of the proceedings.
Thank you, convener. I'll just move my slides on. I think I'm still sharing them. So in terms of policies within the National Planning Guidance, National Planning Framework 4, first of all, the policies 1, 2 and 3 on tackling the climate crisis, mitigation and also biodiversity, those are all relevant to all applications. All decisions should give significant weight to the climate and nature crises and mitigation measures. Policy 6 relates to trees and woodland, which should usually be retained where those are of value, and there has been a tree survey submitted and replacement planting included in the proposal, and that wasn't a reason for refusal for the application. Just to mention, the highlighted policies are where they were used in the reason for refusal. So policy 7 I have on a slide in a moment. Policy 9, that supports development on brownfield sites, but it also supports the reuse of building and states that demolition should be the last resort. Similarly, policy 12 also supports the reuse of buildings rather than demolition. Policy 13 generally states that development should take place in sustainable locations where it can be reached by active travel and public transport. And policy 14, I'll show you on a separate slide in a moment. Policy 15 on local living, it supports housing in areas where there are facilities within walking distance. And policy 16, I just moved my notes on, supports development proposals for new homes where they improve affordability and choice by being adaptable to changing and diverse needs, and which address identified gaps in provision. And then policy 24 relates to digital infrastructure and fast internet connections. So just have a look at policy 7 in a bit more detail, which states that development proposals in conservation areas will only be supported where the character and appearance of the conservation area and its setting is preserved or enhanced, and then the relevant considerations are the architectural and historic character of the area, the existing density, built form and layout, and context citing quality of design and suitable materials. Looking at the local development plan policies, the site's zoned within an H1 residential area. And I'll move on to a slide with that policy in a moment. Same with the design policy. So natural environment, that there was a bat survey undertaken, and which showed there were no bats in the existing building. So that's the relevance of that policy. In terms of trees, as I mentioned, the policy there supports retaining trees. The tree survey and replacement trees were proposed as part of the application. D2 I'll mention again in a moment. Policy D5 on landscape design supports providing a landscape plans for proposals, and policy D7 supports retaining granite buildings and the reuse of granite from demolition. Then policy R5 requires facilities for storage of waste within the site, and R6 on low and zero carbon, that requires low and zero carbon equipment in line with policy for new developments. I think we've mentioned sustainable transport is similar to the NPF4 policy. Parking relates to parking standards within the Aberdeen planning guidance, and there is parking in line with that guidance has been provided. And then again, digital infrastructure relates to high-speed internet being provided. And there are various relevant Aberdeen planning guidance documents. The two mentioned in the reasons for refusal are those ones on development along rear lanes and also subdivision and redevelopment of residential curtilages. So in terms of the rear lanes guidance, it's really context that looks at. And then the subdivision and redevelopment has various sort of rules of thumb in it. So there is the guidance that no more than 1/3 of the plot should be developed. And the report notes that the existing building has a plot coverage of 21%, whereas the proposed building would have a plot coverage of 52%. The rear development along lanes guidance advises that as a general rule a 7-metre depth of building is advised for these types of development, and the proposal is for the building that fronts onto the lane that would have a depth of 8.2 metres, whereas obviously there's the long single story element which is 27 metres in depth from the lane. In terms of ridge height, the guidance states that should be around 5.6 metres, whereas the proposal is for 6.8 to 7.6, depending on where you view the building from, due to the varying height of the lane. Retaining boundary walls is also something that's within the guidance, and that's part of the proposal. In terms of the conservation area character appraisal, that identifies a threat to this conservation area, which is unsympathetic development. So I'll just move on to the policy on residential areas, which is the zoning policy here. So that states that new development will only be approved in principle if it doesn't constitute overdevelopment, it doesn't have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area, there's no loss of open space, and it complies with supplementary guidance, which I've just mentioned, the two most relevant on rear lanes and redevelopment of residential plots. So this is from the policy D2 on amenity, this section on outdoor amenity space. So it's minimum standards for private external amenity space, and those are noted in the planning guidance as being 9 metre length of open space for a house of up to 2 stories. And then it talks also about shading of external private spaces, and the report of handling mentions in relation to that the impact on 78 Queen's Road due to the falling ground level, so that the ground level in the rear garden there is at a lower level. Just move on to policy D6 on the historic environment, and the two most relevant points are that development must protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment, and also that this third point, developments must be designed to respect the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment, protect the setting of listed buildings, character of conservation areas. So I've put the local development plan and the NPF4 design policies both on this slide, and overall high quality design is sought with for developments with a view to improving the overall quality of an area. And policies recognise that at any scale, good design and detail adds to the attractiveness of the built environment. So in terms of the evaluation, the primacy of the development plan, which is both NPF4 and the local development plan, with all applications being determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and each case being treated on its merits. So the basis for determination in this case, would proposals comply with the zoning policy? Sorry, that's meant to say H1, 2's crept in there. That's residential areas policy, and in particular in terms of overdevelopment, which is mentioned in the reason for refusal. Also, what's the impact on the character of the conservation? Is a conservation area, does the proposal conserve or enhance the character of the conservation area and the setting of the nearby listed building? And does the proposal overall comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations weighing for or against? So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members? Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, can I just ask, in terms of the materials for the roof. What did you say it was again? The new materials being proposed? I seem not to have written it down. It's in the paper.
The roof. Sorry, the roof was slate on the main.
And part was sedum as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Can you bring up the picture with the current building that's on it? You know, the one where you show the red line.
Yes.
Please.
Just a moment.
Right.
Yeah, that's the red line.
That's the current building.
Yeah.
And now can we see the photograph as well, please, of the current building? Thank you.
It's just from Street View. That one.
Okay. So I'm just trying to work out. It's a shame we couldn't have overlaid the red line on that, so the new line, should I say, to get an indication. So we've got that green kind of hedgy bit, which is halfway up the site, which is part of 78 Queen's Road, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So where does the site boundary? Can you say from that picture where the site boundary for the new development would be?
Yes.
Is it the light grey or?
Just let me double check from the other plans.
Thank you.
Yeah, it would be just in front of that hedge. If I can just show that again. Yeah.
Okay, so that whole bit, and there's parking at the front of 78, but the garden space, okay, would just be that enclosed. That's fine. And then on page 15 of the report, it said about there used to be a building abutting the lane, visible from the 1900s map, but it was significantly smaller. Is that? And they think it was just a wash house. Is that correct? It's 15
yes,
on
yes, that is what the report says. I haven't seen that plan, but
okay, no, that's fine. Okay, thank you. That's all for me for now. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Lucy. Can you take up the original photograph? There was I noticed there was quite a large development to the right-hand side of the photo.
Yes.
And how many houses? Was it about half a dozen there? And that would be the same size as site. Is that correct?
Just let me pull that up. These ones, do you mean?
Yeah, so that's quite a large. That's the same size of site, isn't it? Virtually.
Well, that would start at the back of the back elevation, so that would come from there.
Yeah. So there's how many houses there then? 1, 2, 3, 4.
I mean, that's probably not one house. I think it's probably flats, but
okay. It was just to understand the size of the plot. That's what it was. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. With the current building in place, what's the current height or the ridge height of that property at the moment?
Just a moment. I have to look at the plans. Sorry, I've got so many plans open. It's roughly just under 6 meters.
Okay, so looking around at 6 meters at the moment. Thank you. Any other members have any further questions?
Sorry, Camilla, sorry to be a pain. I was just trying to, can we pick up the photograph of the whole site where we looked at with the bit of hedging in it? It's just to try and understand
Of the aerial photograph, do you mean?
Yes. Is it the aerial one? No, it's the one where we're looking at the site. I think that's just a normal photograph. It's just the length of the single story, how far back into the site that goes, because it's saying 27 meters. So I was just trying to work that out. What that would be.
Yes.
Not on that one, it's the photo.
Yeah.
So you can make, yeah, sorry, Lucy. Yeah, that one,
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the current one was, sorry, is it 7 meters? From back, I've written 2 numbers down. Or is it 8.2? Or is it 8 point?
I'll go back to the existing plan in a moment, but yeah, the proposed single-story element would extend right back into the site.
Back to about almost the hedge, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just pull that plan up. Yeah, you can see it there.
Yeah, so it comes back to there. Then that wall continues. And then the access into the parking bay, I think you call it, under the can you just show us that picture?
Yes.
I'm just trying to, because there's a wall at the moment and there's obviously space, but at the moment it seems to take it over. Okay. Right. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions, members? Not seeing any hands at this time. So, in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Determination, members. I think where I'm looking at the moment, in terms of looking through our own policies, in terms of policy 7, section F, the current building is of significantly low townscape. To that extent, it's not a historic building. It's got no connection to the historic area around there. It's just sort of plonked on the site, and I don't find it aesthetically pleasing in any way. It's very much of a commercial nature of that site, and doesn't really encompass what we're really looking to be in that area at all. The current ridge height of the existing property is more than what is being proposed here at the moment, so that's sort of in my mind at the moment. And in terms of policy 7, will this new property enhance the area? It's certainly contemporary in design. Enhancements maybe. Just wondering what anyone else sort of has or feels to come into that one. Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. I'd be happy to support the development. I think it would enhance the area, and it's not looking directly onto any other property. The property next door seems to be offices with a big extension onto that building with car parking spaces. Also, the house directly behind the proposed development doesn't seem to have any windows that look directly onto the site, and possibly there are, but there seems to be trees in their garden. So I'd be happy to support the development. Thank you.
I'm
Thank you
kind of
much.
sorry, yeah, you know, I've obviously got kind of mixed views on this one, because of the scale, particularly going back, and it is almost attached. And whilst we've got maybe another a similar kind of idea and another just along the road from it, what we understand is when that and what context it was determined under and policies, and this isn't just a normal street. This is a conservation area, and you know what we don't want to do is undermine the whole conservation nature of the area. So it's, you know, I'm very much about making houses usable for today's, you know, living, and that there used to be a wash house there, which would have obviously supported the main house. So, you know, but equally the thing that's there at the moment is got actually no architectural merit in my view at all, and is actually detrimental to the area. So this is where I'm like, well, you know, that's better, but it still doesn't, you know, tick a lot of the conservation points. So I'm at the moment, I'm just interested to see what other people say. So I'm probably a bit like yourself, convener. I can see the merits from both sides, and we just have to, I suppose, weigh them accordingly. So interested to hear other people's views.
Anyone else wishing to enter? Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I would move to uphold the officer's decision just on the conservation area. The building that's there isn't ideal, isn't it? And then I think I would have approved it if I been on the committee at the time. But I think we have to protect our conservation areas, and I would move that we uphold the officer's decision.
In terms of sort of the characteristic of the current proposed building, going through what we've got here in terms of the material to be used, you know, we're sort of taking it back to from a mansard roof to a nicer slate roof. The use of granite, proposed green roofing in the top up there, as well as a test for the amenity of the property. I think the way that the building would look would tie in better with the area in terms of the materials being used, but it does have that sort of contemporary element off the back of that, and it's whether we are happy to include that sort of aspect into that an area of conservation. Will it enhance that? I think that's the question we're going down here. Does it enhance the area? And going by what we've currently got to what is proposed, I think it does, although it doesn't quite meet with the conservation aspects of everything else around it. But the removal of what we have at the moment would Yeah. It's a 50-50 one in this one, Councillor
Yeah.
Lawton.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, the request to demolish the existing building has been refused. So we'd need to understand if, and I'm only saying if this application was approved, obviously they'd have to revisit to get approval for the demolition. I think, as Great Councillor Lawrence said, my concern is, I've approved things along lanes before, but it tends to be in a smaller scale, where it's maybe been like a garden room, reuse of, upgrading of a garage, rather than quite such an intense. And, and I say, I absolutely see where Councillor Alphonse is coming from, the fact that we have that strip of houses in the rear, but, if we have that end up with that all the way along, I think we kiss goodbye to conservation status for that area. And what does that mean for the other properties, in terms of the granite heritage as we move forward? So, it's just that balance. It's, it's looking at the whole picture rather than just the total looking at that house in isolation. And that's my concern. So yeah, happy to hear from you again, convener, and if Councillor Clark or anything would like to contribute, would be interested to hear what Councillor Clark's obviously got to add as well. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where it comes down to, previous developments versus this development, we do have to treat everything on a case-by-case merit. So yeah, well, Councillor Clark.
I'm betwixt and between. It is a bit too big for the area. What's there just now is small. It's not ideal. But what's going in doesn't meet the conservation area. I really am between both at the moment. Sorry.
Is that yeah. That's saying if in doubt do nout, but we obviously can't do nout.
I think in the terms of the conservation area aspect, obviously we've got our guidance that sits within our LDP, but we've also got a letter from Historic Environment Scotland who have said that they've got absolutely no comment on it and no worry on the back of that. And obviously, Lucy, we'll bring Lucy back in.
Sorry, it was just on the Historic Environment Scotland letter that was in relation to the conservation area consent rather than this application. Just to clarify that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. I am very 50-50 on this one. I like the design. I like the layout of the building. I think it's much better than what we currently have at the moment. It's just that conservation aspect of it. But with the design of the building and the materials being used, does that sort of mitigate or tie in with what we'd like to see in that area? I'm erring towards more overturning at this moment. Happy to go in the room again.
I'm probably going the other way, not because I don't see the merits of the house, and like you, I actually quite like the design, but it's about the location site. And whilst we can point to the one just 2 doors along, my we've got a duty to preserve and enhance the conservation area, and that's not about keeping things in aspect, but I just feel it's just gone a bit too far, particularly the scale of it. And I'd probably come down with upholding the officer's recommendation on this one. But it's not a don't ever come back. It's just not quite to the scale. I think that I'm comfortable with overturning the officer's recommendation, because I think the report's quite thorough. And I think sometimes I can see that officers are stuck in a hard place, but I think for me, they've been quite clear on some of their points here. So I would probably, on this occasion, which is quite unusual for me, I would uphold the officer's recommendation, and that's not being derogatory for our officers' decisions. But I can see sometimes where there's a bit of tension in some of the reports, but I think this one's a bit clearer for me. So I'll probably stick with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any further discussion, or are we happy to go to a vote on this one? Have to go to a vote?
Yeah, if I could just come in, Convener, I think, I mean, there are a lot of lanes in Aberdeen and a lot of buildings like this. And historically, in the lanes, there were staff quarters and stables for long ago. Most of them, there are one or two still there, but most of them have been demolished and made way for mostly office space. But that was the thin end of the wedge. They're chipping away and chipping away and chipping away. So it's we either have a conservation area that's to be conserved, or we don't. And if we keep chipping away, then the conservation area will no longer have the same historical interest, and we lose that to the city. That's how I feel. Thank you.
Yeah, I do understand that, and I think in terms of our properties that face onto the main thoroughfares and things like that, that's absolutely a case to keep the aesthetics of that area. You know, the big traditional granite house and things like that go onto our main thorough routes, but this is a lane to the back of a property that's not seen by through traffic and things like that. So that's where that's kind of swaying me. It's something that's not on a thoroughfare that's going to be kept to the traditionals of what we've got in the granite townhouse and things like that. It's a lane to the back that's accessed by a minimal amount of people. Although we do have the policy in terms of our lanes in the back of there, but a number of them have been developed, and not all of them well, really, in terms of look at what we've got at the moment, provided what we could have in terms of the architectural design of the property. So yeah, I think I'd be coming more down the lines of overturning on this one, Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, again, just not trying to sort of keep the conversation going, but you know, we saw the same on Union Street in terms of the frontages and the streets off of that, and you know, we're now trying to retrofit some of that back in there, and this is where, you know, as I say, it's the whole of the conservation. It's not individual properties we're looking at, it's a conservation area as opposed to a listed building. So that's the different rub for me. If this was just the house itself and all the area around it was just in general use, or you know, so it's the area and the lanes, and we're trying to get back to some sort of I suppose conformity with the conservation area. As I say, it's not that you know, I'm opposed to the design. I think the design's interesting, but it's, yes, the building that's there at the moment is horrendous. I can't be any more blunt than that. But what we don't do is replace a mistake with potentially something that's not quite right. It's just better than what's there. It's about making sure the decision we make is the right decision for the whole of the conservation area. So that's why, and I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to shut up now, Convener. You'll be glad to know.
Not a problem at all. Okay, I think we'll go to the vote. So at the moment, I'll be looking to overturn. Councillor Lawrence. You're on mute, but I can see that you're looking to uphold the officer's recommendations. Yeah. Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, I'll be upholding the officer's recommendation on this, but not to say that there's not something suitable there in the future.
Absolutely. Councillor Alphonse.
I'd like to support the development. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Clark.
After a lot of debating and to-ing and fro-ing, I would like to support the motion because what's there just now isn't right. Maybe what's there is a little bit in the big side, but we've got to go with it at some point. It's a decision. Does it stay what it is, or does it move on? And I think we've got to move on.
So just to clarify, Councillor Clark, you're looking to overturn the officers?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
So that's,
Refuse.
just to confirm, sorry, that's, the application would be approved by majority 3-2. Does Lucy want to come in and recommend any conditions, or?
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Yes. So if I could suggest that conditions go on in terms of planting and landscaping, and that be implemented. I think there's more planting details needed, particularly for the roof. Refuse storage facilities, low and zero carbon emissions, have the standard policy that looks for equipment for that. I think that's all the conditions I'd suggested. It looks as though the materials are sufficiently well detailed. And then there was the advisory on the wood burner.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the one I was going to mention with the wood burning stove into that. Councillor Bolton?
Yeah, it was just in terms of the point I raised earlier, the fact that the demolition had been refused. So I'm not quite sure. And can I just give one piece of advice, having lots of long granite walls where I live, about putting trees with a large root base adjacent to them, because it actually undermines the wall, and some of these walls don't have very deep foundations, that I've found out.
We can request a scheme for landscaping and tree planting, so that can be looked at. In terms of the conservation area consent for demolition, the reason for refusal was that the development proposal for the site has been assessed and has not been granted planning permission. So we wouldn't want to grant permission for the demolition without an acceptable application having been approved for the redevelopment. So if there was an application for the redevelopment, they would have to come back in for conservation area consent.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification on that. So, as the local review body has therefore agreed to overturn the decision of the appointed officer, we've went through the conditions. That's all been done. So please note that decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to applicant or agent in the forthcoming days. Thank you very much, members. Right, turning on to the next reviews. What we're going to do with this one is we're going to take the remaining reviews together. But when it comes to the end, we're going to have to determine each own right. So everything will be lumped together initially. We'll go through the planning processes, all the questions and things like that. But when it comes to determination, we need to go review 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and do the necessary what we're doing there. But hopefully that makes sense. Anyone has any questions on that? Nope. Perfect. So turning to consideration of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th reviews in respect of the decision to refuse the application for detailed plan permission for the replacement of the external door with flood mitigation door at 46 and 48 Marshall Street, Aberdeen, planning reference 240300 and 240302. Detailed plan permission for the replacement of external door with flood mitigation doors and installation of barrier to the existing roller shutters at 12 and 12A Virginia Street. Detailed plan permission for the replacement of an external door with flood mitigation door, installation of barrier to the existing roller shutters at Warehouse 22 Virginia Street, Aberdeen, and detailed plan permission for the replacement of external doors with flood mitigation doors at 24 Virginia Street, Aberdeen. Plan and reference numbers 240297. 240296 and 240294. We will now pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the brief description of the application proposals and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. Again, Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in any consideration of the earlier reviews. Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, there are lots of similarities between these applications, so it seemed to make sense to look at a lot of it together. Right, I've shared my presentation. So, right, so the reviews have all been submitted with the necessary information within the time limits following the decision. In all cases, the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters within the review, and also that the review may be conducted without further procedure, i.e. site visits. So I'll continue to provide some background information to the cases. So this location plan shows all 5 cases. The 2 on Marshall Street, where they're obviously all for flood doors and flood barriers. So the doors in question are actually on the rear on Theatre Lane on the Marshall Street 2. And then these 3 on Virginia Street. Move on to the 3D image there. So these are the properties, Virginia Street. So it's this building, this one, and then these are the 2 that front onto Marshall Street. The doors are actually round the back, so I've got a second image, which, well, it's very difficult to actually make out the doors because they're right down in Theatre Lane down here. But I've got some photographs further on in the presentation. So this is one of the buildings and this is the other one. So going back to the location plan, I've just overlaid that with the conservation area boundary. It's the city centre conservation area, and then listed buildings. So these 2 on Marshall Street are category B listed, and this one is category C, and then the other 2 are not listed but within the conservation area, and they're all traditional granite buildings. So looking first at number 12 and 12A, so obviously need to run through all the sets of plans. So what's proposed is a replacement to these 3 doors, and this is the existing elevation. So this door and these 2. And then there's proposed to be a barrier put across this roller shutter door, all because of sewage overflow during periods of heavy rain, which have, according to the submissions, have become more and more common. So this is as proposed. So I've got details of the doors and the barrier in a moment, but looking at them all together, these would be UPVC steel reinforced doors with a flood stop mechanism in them. And then this is a barrier. So well, I'll look at that in the drawing in a moment, but let me just move on to the barrier. So the 2 aluminium side pieces would be fitted, the side tracks permanently fixed, and then there would be these 2 removable intermediate posts, and then the sections of the barrier would be put in when required. So these are the doors as they currently are. So this is door 1. So that's just a photograph of it. Sorry about that.
Hello. Hi. How's it going?
Yeah, so it's a timber flat panel door, just showing the exterior and then the interior of it. And this is as proposed, so steel reinforced UPVC on the outside door in the same colour, violet blue. And you can see the hinges on the inside view there. So that's door 1. Door 2, a photograph of door 2 and elevations. And then, as proposed, the same type of door, UPVC on the outside, steel reinforced. You can see the hinges there on the inside. And then the third door, photograph there. These are the existing elevations, and then as proposed. And it's the same type, UPVC with steel reinforcement. And then I've just got some photographs of 12A Virginia Street. Those are the 3 doors and the main elevation. So I'll run through the reasons for refusal for this one, and they are very similar for all the cases, although not exactly the same, because 2 of the buildings are not listed. So they're stated in full in the report of handling. Key points are reasons for refusal is the use of UPVC, which wouldn't preserve the character of the listed building or the character of the conservation area. That the doors are not high quality design, not sympathetic to historic building. They're in a prominent location with an adverse impact on the street scene, and therefore contrary to Historic Environment Policy for Scotland, Policy 7 on historic assets and place, Policy 14 on design, Policy H2 on mixed use areas, Policy D1 on quality placemaking, D6 on historic environment, D8 on windows and doors, and the managing change guidance for Historic Environment Scotland on windows and doors. And then for the applicant's case, again, these very similar reasons have been given for all the cases, so I'll run through them on this one and then not for the other cases. So first of all, the reason for doors and the doors and the barrier is to protect the building from flooding by sewage during heavy rain periods, which have become increasingly common, and that they are required to ensure the future use and viability of the building as part of the historic environment. The applicant makes the point that these UPVC doors have been installed by Scottish Water, and that they're a tried and tested product with an active flood seal mechanism. The applicant makes the point that the case officer has suggested alternative companies, and that those companies don't provide the same guarantees, and either they have single styles or they're not made anymore due to the expense. And those were mainly timber doors that were suggested by the case officer. They would be happy to have further discussion on the doors. For example, looking at a modern door that would be a sort of clear intervention. The report from the applicant recognises flood mitigation measures are needed to adapt to climate change, which the case officer makes that point in the report of handling. And they further state that there is a need to protect the historic environment, but that's not being balanced against the adaptation for climate change as per the NPF4 policy. So I'll just move on to the plans for the other cases. So this one is at 22 Virginia Street, not a listed building but within the conservation area. And in this case, there's a replacement for one door with the same steel reinforced UPVC faced door, and then across the roller shutter there would be a similar barrier. And that's the existing door with the elevations as exist at the moment. And it's a timber door with an external letterbox. And then these are the proposed elevations. It would be grey on the outside and white internally. And the same sort of flood barrier would be installed externally. Reasons for refusal is the same as the one that I mentioned earlier, except for this case it's just the character of the conservation area that's relevant. And similarly, reasons from the applicant are the same as mentioned previously. So looking at 24 Virginia Street, that's also unlisted next to 22 that we were just looking at. So in this case there would be 2 doors and 2 barriers. It's a photograph of the as existing. And this is door 1. So as existing, a timber door with vertical timber panels, and then as proposed, it's UPVC again with steel reinforced interior, and the UPVC door is sort of replicates the wood grain effect of the existing door. And then the second door. And as proposed for door 2, again, it would echo that wood grain effect. And that's a photograph of the existing door 1. That's just showing flood measures that are in place at the moment, where I have a slot-in flood barrier. Reasons for refusal, same as 22 Virginia Street, just relate to the conservation area. And again, the applicant's case makes the same points. So just moving on to 46 Marshall Street, this proposal is for double leaf doors, and you can see them there as existing timber double doors, and then as proposed double doors in UPVC with the steel reinforced interior and retaining the roof light, well, replacing it with a double glazed roof light. And those would be black externally and white internally with a push barrier. And this shows the rear elevation of both buildings. So this door at 46 and this door at 48. And that's as existing and then as proposed, with the UPVC facings to the doors, and just sort of echoing the design of the existing doors. It's a cross section through the door to number 46. So that's the glazing panel at the top. It's showing this active flood seal element. And then we've got site photographs of number 46. reasons for refusal relate to the character of the listed building as well as the character of the conservation area, and it refers to the same policies as I mentioned before. And the applicant's case, which is the same as before. So the doors for 48 Marshall Street, that's a photograph of the existing elevations, and then as proposed. And it echoes the same sort of design as existing. And just to note that the doors are not the original also. That's cross-section through the door, proposed door for number 48. It's a different sort of elevational design, and then obviously there's no glazed panel up top for that one. Site photographs of the door at number 48 Marshall Street, that's the door onto Theatre Lane. So other relevant applications are that for the 3 listed buildings, listed building consents also been refused. I did check with the DPEA. They don't appear to have been appealed on their website. And I think we're out of time now. So in terms of consultations, Castle Hill and Pataudry Community Council, there were no comments received, and there was no objection from the Roads DM team. They stated no impact from a roads perspective. So I'll hand back to you, convener, for members to decide whether a site visit is necessary, and none of the sites have been requested for a site visit.
Okay, thank you very much. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the applications. Members, reminder, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, we can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. At the moment, I'm content to proceed, but we'll quickly go around the room. Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, happy to continue.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Happy to continue.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
Can I just ask one question before I, in terms, Ms. Green, about the applicant's statement, which is contrary to what's said in the report in terms of an alternative solution that's made with wood. Are you able to comment on that a bit further in the report when we go into it?
I don't think I can really comment on any more than, I mean, the case officer, I suppose, is not identifying one particular product. They're just looking at the range that might be available.
Okay, that's fine. I'm happy to continue. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you very much. No worries, Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. Happy to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. As members feel we have sufficient information to proceed, we'll now pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the relevant policies and consideration for the reviews.
Thank you, convener. Right, so the relevant policies for all the applications, National Planning Framework for policies 1 and 2 on tackling climate change and climate mitigation are very relevant in this case, and obviously all decisions should give significant weight to the climate and nature crises and climate mitigation. And policy 2 states that development proposals to retrofit measures to help climate adaptation will be supported. Policy 14 relates to design and is similar to policies on design and the adopted and proposed plans, and I'll cover those in a bit more detail in a moment. In terms of the conservation area, special regard must be given to the desirability of preserving and enhancing the conservation area, and there's a duty to ensure that proposals protect the character of listed buildings. Historic environment policy for Scotland and other policies seek to ensure new development in conservation areas preserve and enhance the character and appearance. And policy 22 on flood risk aims to strengthen resilience to flood risk by promoting avoidance and reducing vulnerability to flooding. So, looking at policy 7 on historic assets, proposals in conservation areas will only be supported where the character and appearance of the conservation area and its setting is preserved and enhanced, with those relevant considerations on the character of the area, the built form that exists, and mentioning suitable materials. And then looking at local development plan policies, the sites lie within an area that's zoned under mixed use areas, and those, it's not highly relevant, that policy, but it does refer to development. Development must take into account the character of the surrounding area. And then just moving on to policy D6 on historic environment. Development must protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment. And in terms of appropriate developments, new features must be designed to respect the character, appearance and setting of historic environment and of listed buildings. So policy D8 on windows and doors. The doors that are in at the moment are not the original ones, but where there is the opportunity to replace unsympathetic windows and doors, those will be supported. And then it points towards the planning guidance on repair and replacement of windows and doors. So I've just done this slide which copies an excerpt from that with the sort of more relevant bits highlighted. So it states that composite aluminium and PVCU doors will never be acceptable. Doors with mouldings applied to resemble panelling won't be acceptable, and that any variation from the guidelines must be fully justified. And then it goes on to state that on public elevations in conservation areas, composite door solutions may be appropriate where they would constitute an improvement on the existing design. So looking at design policy now. So this is, D1 is from the local development plan, which seeks that all development ensures a high standard of design with a context appraisal. Policy 14 in NPF 4, the 6 qualities of successful places, and I've just picked out the most relevant elements from that. So the second quality, pleasant, includes protection, including flood prevention, and also ensures climate resilience. The fourth one on distinctive mentions sense of place and choice of materials and finishes and detailing. And then quality 6, adaptable, mentions investing in long-term value of buildings, allowing for flexibility, quality and function, and also design for high quality. And also mentioned is longevity and resilience, with changing needs over time and responding to environmental priorities. So finally, looking at Historic Environment Scotland's Managing Change Guidance on doors. It says that replacement may be appropriate in instances where historic doors have been previously replaced using inappropriate designs and materials, and that any new replacement proposals must seek to improve the situation through design and materials that are sympathetic to the quality, to the character of the building. So evaluation of each application must be on the basis of the development plan policies, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, with each case being treated on merit. So So looking at the basis for these decisions, would the proposals comply with the zoning policy H2, which covers all of the sites, and in particular in terms of the character of the area? And in terms of the character of the conservation area, does the proposal conserve or enhance the character of the area? And then for the 3 listed buildings, 12 Virginia Street, 46 and 48 Marshall Street, do they preserve or adversely affect the character of the listed buildings? And in terms of the windows and doors guidance in particular, is there justification to deviate, and what is the justification? So does the proposal comply with the development plan as a whole, or are there material considerations that weigh against that? So yeah, just a reminder that you need to look at each case in turn, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Questions, members? But Councillor Alphonse and then Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Lucy. Just, I mean, these doors that are in place at the moment are not particularly beautiful. In fact, I think they're quite unsightly. And I think, I mean, apart from the ones in Virginia Street, the Marshall Street ones are certainly hidden. But, you know, and I also think that these UPVC timber doors that look like timber are amazing. And I think also they're you know, they won't look out of place if they're installed on Virginia Street. And also if the companies are trying to keep sewage out of their buildings, and this is the suitable alternative to a wooden door, I would absolutely support that. I think that must be awful for them, you know. And how often do they flood? That was one of my questions. How often do they flood with sewage? Are you aware of that?
Only that they have flooded quite a few times since 2020. Okay. But I don't know the number.
Okay. Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Green, and I appreciate that each application is on its own merits. But we have replaced doors in the conservation area with flood specific with new PVC, and I know it was possibly under different terms. It was under delegated report in 2015 for the Tivoli, and it's just if whether we could add some of the conditions in terms of the ironmongery and things like that, if we were, because, you know, I think it must be horrendous to every time it rains to live in fear. And this is where it's different from the last application. This is necessity rather than desirability in terms of protecting people's property. So, you know, I'm just wondering if there could be a level of conditions that would marry with what we've used in other, which is just along the road, to give a bit of uniformity on our applications, because I think it is because of I mean, even then there wasn't the same emphasis on the climate crisis or emergency. So, you know, I think we've got to try and look at what we've done before and see if we can create a new standard that would then give a bit of uniformity. So it's just to understand, you know, in principle we could agree, but with a level of conditions that would allow a bit of consistency across the conservation area. So it's just to find out if that is possible with this application, or these applications, should I say.
In terms of ironmongery, where that's proposed, yeah, we could condition that.
Yeah. And just again, the sort of the visual look with the wood grain effect was what we had gone for previously, but it was the new PVC. Again, just to try and standardise what we were doing for these types of situations. So that's all. Thank you, convener. If we would be able to condition that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it was a number of properties around sort of Trinity Street that had that flooding event in 2015 and the subsequent flood doors that came off the back of that. So yeah, Absolutely, Councillor Bolton. That's was certainly in my mind when we were looking through these applications there. Any other questions, members? Councillor Clark.
Sorry. I totally agree and get where the PVC doors, the wooden ones, yes, can rot, even though you have got a barrier inside them. I do feel we've got to move with the times. They're not gaudy, they're not horrible bright colours. They are going to be tasteful with that. So I was just wondering, would there be a policy that they've got to be in keeping with the colour and tones of the area? I mean, I know there was said it's black, and the insides is white, but I just want to make sure that the conditions are that they are in keeping, the colour is in keeping with the area. So black with the granite, grey with the granite would go, even dark navy would go.
There are colours proposed which match the existing colours, so yeah, I mean, if we were happy with that, we wouldn't need to condition that details on the drawing.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, members? Not seeing any at this time. Okay, so we now need to consider, a little bit further on than that. So in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner of which reviews to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case are being considered and taken into account. So we'll now move to the determination, members. We need to go through this step by step. So with review number 2, which is a detailed plan permission for the replacement of external door with flood mitigation doors at 46 Marshall Street, Aberdeen. And this is planning reference 240300. Are members minded on this?
I would overturn the officer's recommendation with the discussion that we had previously with Ms Green around conditions. Whilst I accept that there is obviously contention and a rub with our historic policies, I think that, as we've heard, that we have to give heavy consideration to the flood, the climate crisis that we're facing, and I think it is about balancing out. And I think with those additional those conditions that could be framed by Ms Green, I think we're doing all we can to preserve and respect the historic context, but whilst giving due consideration to the climate and also the welfare of both the buildings and the people in them. And I'll just leave it at that, convener.
Yep, I would certainly agree with that, but we'll quickly go around the room. Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I would fly in the face of everything I said in the last case, but I think if we overturn the officer's decisions, the flood doors will probably, in the long term, be better for the conservation of the buildings in the long term. So I would agree.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark.
I agree with the new doors. As for 46, 48 Marshall Street, I think that was said that was not the original doors we were shown in the photograph anyway. I would like to overturn the decision because I think these flood doors would be more beneficial to the building.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. I totally agree with everything everybody else has said and happy to overturn. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in relation to review number 2, the local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously overturn the officer's recommendation, and that's with the conditions that Councillor Bolton outlined.
Yeah.
Lucy?
Yes, so those are the ironmongery and the wood grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say as well, convener, that the reason for my question at the start in terms of officers had identified a more appropriate alternative, and whilst it might have been more expensive, I would certainly have gone that way. But because it wasn't actually identified and we had a challenge from the applicant, I felt that the emergency of the situation, particularly moving into winter, it was important that we move forward. So just probably a learning note for our officers, if they can give us more definite evidence of alternatives, that would be far more helpful than just mentioning that there could be alternatives. That's all. Thank you. Sorry, Convener.
No problem at all. I'll pick off pieces of the recording at the end, and we will come back in the future regarding that. But thank you very much. Okay, that one's now been decided. So we'll go to review number 3, and this is for the detailed plan permission for the replacement of external basement door with flood mitigation door at 48 Marshall Street. We'll go around the room again. I'm happy to overturn. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
I agree.
Councillor Alphonse.
Happy to overturn, Convener. Thank you.
And Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, again, with just the same reasoning and rationale from previously. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Therefore, the local review body has therefore agreed unanimously to overturn the officer's recommendations at this time, and that's with the same conditions as the previous review. Next one is review 4, which is detailed plan permission for the replacement of external doors and flood mitigation doors and installation of barrier to the existing rolling shutters at 12 and 12A Virginia Street. We'll go around the room again. I'm happy to overturn. Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, happy to overturn.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Happy to overturn.
Councillor Alphonse.
Happy to overturn.
And Councillor Bolton.
Without being repetitive, yeah, for the same reasons previously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that means the local review body has therefore agreed to overturn by unanimous the decision of the appointed officer, and with the same conditions as we've previously discussed. Review number 5, detailed plan permission for the replacement of external door with flood mitigation door and installation of barrier to the existing roller shutters at Warehouse 22 Virginia Street, Aberdeen. Round the room again, I'm happy to overturn. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, happy to overturn.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Happy to overturn.
Thank you. Councillor Alphonse.
Happy to overturn.
And Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, agreed with the same reasoning.
Thank you very much. The local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously overturn the decision of the appointed officer with the same conditions placed of the previous reviews. Review number 6, detailed plan permission for the replacement of external doors with flood mitigation doors at 24 Virginia Street, Aberdeen. Go around the room quickly. I'm happy to overturn. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, happy to overturn.
Councillor Clark.
Happy to overturn.
Councillor Alphonse.
Happy to overturn.
Councillor Bolton.
Agreed for the same reasons. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. The local review body has therefore agreed to, by unanimous, to overturn the decision of the appointed officer, subject to the same conditions in the previous few reviews. Members, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of today's meeting, and we'll see you all at the next one.
Bye.
Thank you, Convener. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you very
everyone.
much.
Bye.
Thanks.